Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a little trip back in time, not to a grand palace or a famous battlefield, but to a place far more aromatic. We're heading to London in the summer of 1858. Now, I know what you're thinking. Victorian London, how quaint. Top hats, foggy streets, Sherlock Holmes, and you're not wrong, but we're going to experience it in a way that, let's be honest, you probably not survived the first day. This is the story of a city so overwhelmed by its own success, it nearly choked on itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel find other history lovers who appreciate the quieter, weirder side of the past. And while you're at it, drop me a comment and let me know what city you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing where these stories travel. Okay, now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you're stepping out, not from a time machine, but from a dense, swirling pocket of fog, right onto a cobblestone street. The year is 1858. The first thing that hits you isn't the smell not yet, anyway it's the sound. Overwhelming symphony of noise. The rhythmic clatter of 1,000 iron-rimmed carriage wheels on stone. The echoing clip-clop of countless horses. The distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. And underneath it all, a deep, unceasing human hum. This is London, the largest, wealthiest, and most crowded city the world has ever known. Over 2.5 million souls are crammed into this sprawling metropolis, and it feels like every single one of them is out on the street with you right now. You pull your collar up against the damp air, a signature blend of coal smoke and river mist. The buildings around you are tall and narrow, leaning against each other for support like tired old men. Their brick faces are stained a permanent, deep gray from the relentless soot that falls like a fine black snow. Gas lamps are beginning to flicker to life, casting a hazy, golden glow on the bustling scene. Men in dark top hats and women in impossibly wide crinoline skirts navigate the crowded pavements with a practiced art, while ragged children, the famous street urchins, dart through the forest of legs like tiny, quick-fingered fish. You decide to cross the street, which is less of a decision and more of a perilous undertaking. The road itself is a treacherous landscape of mud, cobblestones, and a thick, dark layer of horse manure. This is where you encounter a curious figure, a small boy, no older than 10, holding a worn-out broom. He's a crossing sweeper. For a halfpenny, he'll frantically sweep a narrow path for you through the muck, allowing you to cross without ruining your shoes. This was a real and often quite competitive profession. It's a tiny detail, but it tells you everything about the city's state. It was so filthy that people could make a living just by clearing a path through the grime. You give the boy a coin and make your way across, feeling the uneven stones under your feet. This is the very heart of the Industrial Revolution, a place of incredible innovation and desperate poverty existing side by side. For every magnificent new bridge or factory belching smoke as a sign of progress, there are a dozen overcrowded, squalid tenements hidden away in labyrinthine alleys. Historians still argue about the true feeling of this era. Was it a dark, oppressive age defined by its grim social problems, as Dickens so vividly portrayed? Or was there an undercurrent of electrifying optimism, a sense that humanity was on the cusp of conquering nature itself? The answer, you suspect, is both. You can feel the energy, the raw, chaotic power of a city that is inventing the modern world on the fly. But as you walk, you start to become aware of something else. It's a low, persistent background note in the sensory orchestra of the city. A faint, sweet, and deeply unpleasant scent that seems to cling to the back of your throat. It's not overwhelming yet, just a hint of what's to come. You notice people dabbing their noses with scented handkerchiefs, a gesture so common it's barely noticeable. The source of this growing unease seems to emanate from the direction of the river, the great River Thames. For centuries, it has been London's lifeblood, its main artery for trade, transport, and water. But now, it's becoming something else entirely. It's becoming the city's problem. A very, very big problem that is about to get a whole lot worse. That faint, unpleasant scent you noticed. Let's follow it. As you move through the city, you realize it's not just one scent, but a complex bouquet of decay. To understand its source, you have to look at one of the era's proudest achievements, a symbol of modern convenience that was, ironically, at the heart of the problem, the flushing toilet. Now, you might think of a toilet as a simple thing, but in the mid-19th century, it was a status symbol, a piece of cutting-edge technology. For centuries, Londoners had relied on outhouses and cesspits, big holes dug in the backyard or basement where waste would just accumulate. It was the job of the night soil men, a profession as unpleasant as it sounds, to empty these pits in the dead of night, carting the contents away to sell as fertilizer. It was a closed-loop system, in a way, dirty but contained. Then came progress. Inventors like Alexander Cumming and Joseph Bramah had perfected the water closet in the late 18th century. It's by the 1850s, thanks to the Great Exhibition of 1851, where George Jennings' public toilets were a massive hit. The flushing toilet became the must-have appliance for any respectable middle-class home. It was clean, it was private, and it magically whisked away the problem with a simple pull of a chain. But where did it whisk it to? That's the crucial question nobody seemed to be asking. The answer was the sewer. But London's sewers weren't designed for this. They were ancient, crumbling brick tunnels, many dating back to Roman times, intended only to carry away rainwater from the streets. They were never meant to handle the concentrated waste of millions of people. So, here you are, in a well-to-do London home. You admire the polished mahogany and the intricate wallpaper. The owner proudly shows you his new water closet. It's a marvel of porcelain and brass. But what you can't see is the pipe leading from it. That pipe connects directly to the old rainwater sewer under the street. And that sewer, following the natural gradient of the land, has only one destination, the River Thames. Every time someone in this house hand and tens of thousands of other houses flushed, they were contributing to a colossal, unseen problem. It was a classic case of out of sight, out of mind. Strange and rather disgusting tidbit from the era is the existence of flumen or toshers, scavengers who waded through these sewers in the dark, hunting for coins, dropped jewelry, or bits of valuable metal. They were the unofficial explorers of this foul underworld, and their very existence speaks to the sheer volume of material, both valuable and vile, that was now coursing beneath the city's streets. Historians still debate the primary driver behind the toilet's rapid adoption. Was it a genuine public health concern and a desire for cleanliness? Or was it more about social climbing and keeping up with the Joneses? For many, installing a water closet was a way to signal their modern, civilized status, separating them from the unwashed masses. The fatal flaw was that this individual solution created a massive collective disaster. Before, waste was collected in isolated cesspits, which was terrible for the immediate household, but didn't poison the entire city's water source. Now, with the interconnected sewer system, every flush became a tiny act of pollution that contributed to a citywide catastrophe. The invention meant to bring hygiene into the home was effectively turning the city's main artery into a single, gigantic, open sewer. And as you stand by a window, that faint smell you noticed earlier seems a little stronger, a little more insistent. The problem is no longer abstract. Cool, leave the house and decide to walk towards the source of that smell, the River Thames. The closer you get, the more the air thickens. It's a heavy, cloying sweetness. It's like rotting vegetables mixed with industrial chemicals and something uniquely foul that you can't quite identify. You see a grand bridge ahead, perhaps London Bridge itself. As you step onto it, you lean over the stone parapet to look down at the legendary river, and what you see stops you in your tracks. This is not the majestic, flowing river of paintings and poems. It's not even water. It's a thick, greasy, brown-gray soup. The surface is not smooth, but lumpy, covered in a slick, iridescent film of coal, tar, and industrial effluents. Bubbles of methane and hydrogen sulfide sporadically burst on the surface, releasing little puffs of even more potent stench. You can see solid objects floating in the slow, turgid current. Animal carcasses, rotting food, rags, and everywhere, a viscous, brown slurry of raw sewage. The river is visibly, grotesquely dying. In fact, in 1855, the great scientist Michael Faraday conducted a simple experiment. He dropped pieces of white paper into the river and recorded how quickly they disappeared from view. His conclusion was stark. The Thames was an opaque, fermenting sewer. He wrote letters to the Times, warning that the river had become an intolerable evil and a disgrace to this metropolitan city. But his warnings, like many others, were largely ignored by the government, who were locked in endless debates about who should pay for a solution. You notice something else. There are no fish. Or rather, the only fish are dead, floating belly up in the sludge. For centuries, the Thames had been a source of salmon, eels, and other fish that were a staple of the London diet. Now, the river is so deoxygenated and polluted that almost nothing can survive in it. This had a profound impact on a very specific group of people, the Thames fishermen. This ancient trade, passed down through generations, was completely wiped out by the mid-19th century. Their livelihoods vanished as the river they depended on became a toxic stew. It's a quiet, forgotten tragedy within the larger, smellier one. You watch as a river steamer churns past, its paddle wheels kicking up a spray of what can only be described as filth. The passengers on deck are all holding handkerchiefs to their faces, their expressions a mixture of disgust and resignation. The boat leaves a trail of churning brown sludge in its wake. It's on this dying river that a significant portion of London's drinking water was still being drawn. Private water companies would pump water directly from the Thames, give it a rudimentary filtering through sand and gravel, and then pipe it directly into people's homes. So, the very substance that people were using to flush their new toilets was, in a roundabout way, coming back to them through their kitchen taps. The full horror of this cycle was not yet understood by the general public. There's a continuing debate among historians about how aware the average Londoner was of this direct connection. Did they know that drinking water came from the same river they saw as an open sewer? Or did the complex network of private water companies obscure this terrifying reality? Whatever the answer, the stage was set. The city was drinking from its own toilet, and the consequences were about to become terrifyingly clear. The sight and smell of the river are sickening. But in 1858, the reason people feared it went beyond simple disgust. It was rooted in a deeply ingrained and profoundly wrong scientific theory, the miasma theory. As you stand on the bridge, a gentleman next to you coughs into his handkerchief, muttering about the bad air. This was the dominant medical belief of the time. The word miasma comes from the Greek for pollution, and the theory held that diseases like cholera, chlamydia, the Black Death were caused by inhaling miasma, a poisonous vapor or mist filled with particles from decaying matter. In short, people believed that bad smells literally were the disease. This theory made a certain intuitive sense. Slums, swamps, and sewers were smelly, and they were also places where disease was rampant. It seemed logical to connect the two. So, the terrifying logic for a Londoner in the 1850s was that the Great Stink wasn't just unpleasant. It was a visible, smellable cloud of death hanging over the city. Every foul breath you took could be the one that delivered a fatal illness. This is why people carried scented handkerchiefs, burned incense, and hung sweet-smelling herbs in their homes. It wasn't just to make things more pleasant. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, an attempt to fight the bad air with good air. But there was a lonely, brilliant voice of opposition to this mainstream view, Dr. John Snow. Today, we remember him as a father of modern epidemiology, but in his time, he was largely seen as a crank. Snow had a radical, unbelievable idea. Cholera wasn't spread by air, but by contaminated water. He had painstakingly proven his theory during the 1854 cholera outbreak in Soho through meticulous mapping and interviews. He traced the outbreak to a single public water pump on Broad Street. He famously had the handle of the pump removed, and the local outbreak immediately subsided. It was a landmark moment in public health history. You would think this would have changed everything. It didn't. The medical establishment, deeply invested in the miasma theory, dismissed his findings. They argued that the water from the pump probably just smelled so bad that people stopped drinking it, thereby avoiding the miasma. This is where you find one of those weird little footnotes of history. One of the key pieces of evidence for Snow-S theory came from a workhouse where almost no one got sick despite being in the heart of the outbreak. Why? Because, as Snow discovered, the workhouse had its own private well and didn't use the Broad Street pump. An even stranger piece of evidence came from a local brewery. The workers there drank beer all day instead of water, and almost none of them contracted cholera. The brewing process, of course, involved boiling the water, which killed the bacteria. At the time, it just looked like another mysterious anomaly. The debate between miasma and germ theory is a classic example of a paradigm shift in science. Historians still analyze why Snow's clear evidence was so readily dismissed. Was it institutional inertia, professional jealousy, or simply that the miasma theory was so deeply embedded in the culture that people could imagine an alternative? The idea that an invisible creature in the water could kill you was, to many, far more fantastical than the idea that a deadly smell could. So, as you stand there, watching the foul river, you are witnessing a city terrified for all the wrong reasons. They feared the smell, the miasma, while the real killer, the cholera vibrio bacterium, was silently flowing into their cups and glasses, completely invisible and odorless. The stage is perfectly set for a catastrophe. You have a river groaning under the weight of a city's waste, okay? And a population terrified of a smell they believe to be death itself. All that's missing is a catalyst. And in June of 1858, that catalyst arrived in the form of a relentless, sweltering heat wave. The sun, which had been meekly hiding behind the London fog for months, decided to make a dramatic entrance. Was it just a random weather event? Or was it part of a larger climatic pattern affecting Europe at the time? The usual, cheerful street banter has died down, replaced by a tense, irritable silence. The city, which a few weeks ago felt vibrant and powerful, now feels sick and suffocating. Every crack and keyhole is stuffed with rags to keep the smell out. The most popular consumer product of the summer is, without a doubt, perfume, while newspapers and official records tell us about the big picture. The personal, day-to-day experiences are harder to capture. Hate crime rates go up due to the general misery and irritability. Did religious attendance spike as people prayed for deliverance? These are questions that are debated, often relying on anecdotal evidence from diaries and letters. What is clear is that the social fabric of the city was stretched to its limit. The shared misery created a strange kind of bond, but it also frayed nerves and shortened tempers. The city was a pressure cooker, and the heat and the smell were tightening the lid. And nowhere was this pressure felt more acutely than in the very seat of power. A building situated with exquisite irony right on the banks of the stinking river, but not the delicate floral scents you might imagine. People were dousing themselves in their handkerchiefs in powerful, pungent scents like lavender water, vinegar, and camphor. The goal wasn't to smell good, but simply to smell of something else. It was a form of aromatic warfare, trying to overpower the smell of the river with a less offensive, but equally strong, personal smell. One of the strangest fads of the time was the aromatic vinegar contained in a small, ornate box called a vinaigrette. A lady would carry this tiny box, and when the stench became too much, she would open it and take a deep sniff of the powerful, eye-watering vinegar-soaked sponge inside. It was the Victorian equivalent of a smelling salt for fending off a citywide bad smell. The heat has pulled the plug on London's self-deception. Anyone with a country estate packed their bags and left London for the summer, leaving the city to the poor and the working classes who had no choice but to endure it. For those left behind, life became a series of small, smelly torments. A simple walk to the market was an ordeal. A ride on an omnibus was, according to one account, a journey into the belly of a leviathan. Even the food tasted of the stink. But perhaps the most pervasive feeling was fear. With the miasma theory firmly in their minds, every Londoner felt they were living on borrowed time. They watched their neighbors for any sign of sickness, wondering who would be next. Cholera was the great fear, but rates of diphtheria, typhoid, and other diseases were also high. For years, they had flushed their problems away, sending them down a pipe to be forgotten. But now, the sun had cooked those problems up and was serving them back to the entire city on a plume of foul-smelling air. There was nowhere left to hide. The crisis had reached a tipping point. Some have suggested links to solar cycles or distant volcanic activity, but the evidence is sparse. The smell has seeped into every corner of the city. As you walk away from the Thames, you'd expect some relief, but there is none. The stench hangs heavy in the air, a constant, oppressive blanket. Now, your focus shifts to the ordinary people of London. How are they living through this? The answer is, with great difficulty and a fair bit of desperate creativity. You see a woman vigorously scrubbing her front step, not just with water, but with a bucket of diluted carbolic acid. Sharp, clean smell providing a momentary, tiny shield against the greater stink. Shopkeepers hang sheets soaked in chloride of lime over their doorways, a futile attempt to purify the air that enters their premises. For the people of London, however, the cause was irrelevant. The effect was all-consuming. The sun, usually a symbol of life and joy, had become a malevolent force, an alchemist turning their river into a poison factory. They were trapped. The very air they needed to breathe was becoming unbreathable. Day after day, it beat down on the city. Temperatures soared to over 35 degrees Celsius in the shade, and much higher in the direct sun. For a city built of brick and stone with no air conditioning, this was oppressive. But the real horror was what the heat was doing to the river. You could almost feel it yourself. The sun is like a giant magnifying glass focused on the Thames. The water level was already low due to a dry spring, meaning the concentration of sewage was higher than ever. It's no longer just a scent. It has a physical presence. It coats your tongue, stings your eyes, and makes you feel nauseous. Newspapers of the day tried their best to describe it. They called it a pestilential stench, a mephitic vapor, a death-fraught miasma. One journalist for the city press memorably wrote, "The river is now a sewer, in a state of putrefaction. There's a curious, little-known detail about how Londoners measured the intensity of the stink. They used something called tannin-soaked papers. Strips of paper soaked in lead acetate would be hung up. The hydrogen sulfide in the air would react with the lead acetate, turning the paper black. The darker the paper got and the faster it turned, the worse the stink was. In the summer of 1858, these papers were turning black almost instantly. Now, the heat was essentially cooking this foul mixture. Its process of decomposition, driven by bacteria, went into overdrive. The river began to ferment. You can see the surface bubbling more violently now, like a vast, sluggish cauldron. The heat accelerated the breakdown of organic matter, releasing enormous quantities of methane, carbon dioxide, and, most potently, hydrogen sulfide, the gas that gives rotten eggs their signature smell. This great stink, which had been a persistent background problem for years, was about to go from a nuisance to a full-blown crisis. You retreat from the bridge, trying to find some shade in a narrow alleyway, but there's no escaping the smell. The heat wave's exact meteorological cause is something historians and climate scientists still occasionally discuss. You see people walking faster, their faces grim, handkerchiefs pressed firmly to their noses. The crisis is no longer confined to the riverbank. In homes, windows are nailed shut despite the suffocating heat. The rich, of course, had an easier way out. They fled. Historians are still trying to piece together the full social impact of the great stink on daily life. You now find yourself standing before one of the most famous buildings in the world, the Palace of Westminster, the home of the British Parliament. Its grand Gothic revival towers rise majestically into the hazy sky. But this symbol of imperial power has a very smelly secret. Its magnificent riverfront terrace, designed for leisurely strolls and political scheming, is completely deserted. And its most important feature, state-of-the-art ventilation system designed to draw fresh air from the riverside, is now its greatest curse. Was it a local issue for the various parish councils? A citywide problem for the newly formed Metropolitan Board of Works? Oh, or a national crisis that required government funding? He introduced a bill, the Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act. It would be picked apart by committees, face opposition from fiscally conservative MPs, and get bogged down in political maneuvering. But this time was different. The most powerful, motivating force in politics was at play. The shared, immediate, and overwhelming discomfort of the politicians themselves. A cheer might have gone up in Parliament if the members weren't so busy trying not to breathe too deeply. But a law is just a piece of paper. Okay? A plan needs a planner. The £3 million question was, who on earth could design and build a system on this scale? Project more ambitious than anything London had ever seen before. The city needed a hero. And quietly, in the offices of the Metropolitan Board of Works, that hero was already waiting. He had a plan. He had the expertise, and he was about to get the green light. When Disraeli introduced the bill, there was barely any debate. Members from all political sides stood up, not to argue, but to urge for its immediate passage. They were literally holding their noses and voting aye. The bill sailed through the House of Commons and the House of Lords in just 18 days. This is a fascinating and weirdly specific piece of trivia. A major public health crisis was solved, not primarily by scientific understanding or compassion for the poor, but by the fact that the smell had made life unbearable for the rich and powerful. It was a dry, technical-sounding name for what was, in effect, an emergency declaration of war on the stink. Some scholars argue it as a cynical story about how power only acts when its own comfort is threatened. Others see it as a more pragmatic moment, where a crisis simply became too big to ignore, forcing a famously slow system into decisive action. The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in between. What's undeniable is that the Great Stink had achieved what reason and evidence could not. It had broken the political deadlock. The bill had a simple, powerful objective: to give the Metropolitan Board of Works the authority, and crucially the money, to build a massive, comprehensive new sewer system that would intercept all of London's sewage and carry it far downstream away from the city. The bill proposed a loan of £3 million, an astronomical sum at the time, equivalent to billions today, to be funded by a 3-penny tax on all London households for the next 40 years. Historians still analyze these debates to understand the complex politics of 19th century urban administration. The prevailing attitude was one of laissez-faire, reluctance for the central government to interfere, especially to spend money and local problems. But the Great Stink was changing that. It was a great equalizer. It didn't matter if you were a rich lord or a commoner. The smell afflicted everyone. It was now wafting directly into the noses of the very people who had the power to do something about it. It was pumping the concentrated stench of the Thames directly into the committee rooms and chambers of government. There was talk of abandoning Westminster altogether and moving Parliament to Oxford or St. Albans. The government's own law courts, also located by the river, had to be abandoned mid-session. The pressure was mounting. The stink had done what years of reports, scientific warnings, cholera outbreaks could not. It had created an overwhelming political will to act. The time for debate was over. The smell was literally forcing the hand of government. The smell, in the end, was more persuasive than any politician. The crisis in Parliament reached its breaking point on a particularly hot day in mid-June. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Benjamin Disraeli, a man known for his wit and novels, tried to flee a committee room overlooking the river. Was seen dramatically clutching a handful of papers to his face and running out, only to be met with the same stench in the corridors. The government was cornered. They could either abandon their seat of power or finally solve the problem. They chose to solve it. What followed was a stunning display of legislative speed, something completely out of character for the usually sluggish and debate-heavy British Parliament. Imagine you re a member of Parliament in June 1858. You read trying to debate the future of the British Empire in India, but you can't concentrate because the air is so foul it makes your eyes water. The smell is inescapable. It permeates the ancient stonework, the leather benches, the dusty law books. The situation became so desperate that the authorities resorted to a truly remarkable, almost comical solution. They ordered the curtains of the entire building to be soaked in a solution of chloride of lime and hung, dripping in the windows. The idea was that the chemical would neutralize the miasma as it wafted in. So you have this extraordinary scene. The lawmakers of the most powerful nation on earth are sitting in their grand chambers, surrounded by smelling, damped cloths, trying to legislate through a chemical fog of their own making. Of course, it barely worked. The chloride of lime had its own pungent, bleachy smell, which combined with a river stench to create a new, uniquely awful perfume of chemical decay. The man in charge of the building's maintenance, Goldsworthy Gurney, was also ordered to dump vast quantities of lime and carbolic acid directly onto the Thames foreshore at low tide. Hoping to disinfect the mud itself was a Herculean task that achieved almost nothing against the sheer volume of filth. A little-known fact is that the parliamentarians' complaints were meticulously recorded in the official parliamentary record, Hansard. You can still read their dramatic speeches today, where they spend more time describing the insufferable and pestiferous stench than they do debating actual policy. One MP famously declared the Thames to be a Stygian pool, reeking with ineffable and unbearable horror. The debate over who was responsible for fixing the river had been dragging on for years. The climax came in late June. The heat was relentless, the smell was unbearable, and the dripping curtains were failing. Disraeli, who was also the leader of the House of Commons, took charge. You can imagine the scene. Normally, a bill of this magnitude would be debated for months, if not years. This rapid legislative action is a focal point for many historical analyses. So, the law is passed. The money is allocated. The law is passed. The money is there. And all eyes turn to one man, Joseph Bazanget. As you picture him, don't imagine a flamboyant, larger-than-life character. By all accounts, Bazanget was the opposite. He was a quiet, meticulous, and deeply serious man. Kay, in fleeing Bazanget, would calmly take his lunch on the terrace of Parliament, seemingly immune to the smell. He is often hailed as the man who saved London, armed with a new law, a massive budget, and years of preparation. He unrolled his blueprints. What he proposed was not a simple repair or an extension of the old system. It was something revolutionary, a grand, sweeping vision that would not just solve the problem of the stink. He didn't just plan for the London of 1858. He was planning for the future. He needed 1,100 miles of new street sewers to connect to his 82 miles of massive interceptor tunnels. The final destination for all this intercepted sewage would be two giant outfalls at Beckton on the north side of the river and Crossness on the south. Here, the sewage would be held in massive reservoirs and then released into the Thames on the EV tide, carrying it far out to sea, away from the city's water intakes. It was a simple, powerful, and incredibly ambitious solution. The blueprints were signed off. The contracts were awarded. Now came the hard part, building it. The project would require 318 million bricks, nearly 1 million cubic yards of concrete, and the excavation of over 3.5 million cubic yards of earth. Many engineers at the time questioned his methods and materials. The use of Portland cement, a relatively new material on such a massive scale, was a huge gamble. Some historians still debate whether Bazanget doublet. Strategy was a stroke of genius, foresight, or a colossal over-engineering driven by an almost obsessive desire for perfection. Was he being prudent, or was he simply a man who loved building big things? His superiors asked him to calculate the pipe diameter needed for the city's current population. Bazalgette did the math. Then he took the result and, on his own authority, doubled it. He famously said, "Well, we're only going to do this once, and there's always the unforeseen." He designed the system to handle the waste of a city of 4.5 million people, nearly double London's population at the time. This incredible foresight is the primary reason his sewers are still functioning today. It's a little-known detail that his calculations even accounted for the maximum foreseeable rainfall, ensuring the system wouldn't be overwhelmed by storms, but would fundamentally reshape the city's relationship with its own waste and its own river for a century to come. The quiet engineer was about to get very, very busy. However, some revisionist historians have posed an interesting question. Was Bazalgette a lone genius? Or was he the right man at the right time, synthesizing the ideas of many other engineers and sanitation reformers who came before him? The debate isn't about diminishing his achievement, but about placing it in a broader context of a growing public health movement. The high and mid-level sewers could rely entirely on gravity to carry the waste eastward, but the low-level sewers, serving the areas right beside the river, posed a problem. They were below the high tide mark, so gravity alone wouldn't work. For this, Bazalgette planned something truly monumental: gigantic, cathedral-like pumping stations. These steam-powered behemoths, like the ones at Abbey Mills and Crossness, would be architectural marvels in their own right. Their job was to lift millions of gallons of sewage from the low-level sewers up into the main outfall sewers. They were the mechanical hearts of his new system. It's argued that figures like Edwin Chadwick, who had been advocating for sanitary reform for decades, laid the intellectual groundwork that Bazalgette was finally able to build upon. He would just sit there, looking at the filthy river, not with disgust, but with the cool, appraising eye of a surgeon about to perform a complex operation. This little piece of folklore, whether true or not, perfectly captures his public image. A man of science, you're looking at a map of London crisscrossed with new lines, a vision of an entirely new subterranean anatomy for the city. His plan was elegant in its core concept: interception. Instead of letting London's 100,000 cesspools and countless smaller sewers continue to dump directly into the Thames, he would build a new network of massive interceptor sewers running parallel to the river from west to east. These interceptors would be built at a gentle slope, just enough for gravity to do most of the work. They would catch all the sewage from the existing sewers before it could reach the river, like catching water from a leaky roof with a giant gutter, still unfazed by the very chaos he was about to conquer. It's a slightly more obscure fact that Bazalgette was a brilliant PR man for his own project. He understood that to maintain public support, he needed to make the public understand and appreciate the engineering. He created beautiful color-coded maps and drawings that were displayed publicly, turning complex engineering into accessible art. He was the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, a position he had held for a few years. He was 39 years old, known for his incredible work ethic, his precise drawings, and his habit of personally overseeing every detail of his projects. He wasn't a politician or a public firebrand. He was an engineer through and through. His backstory is one of quiet determination. Born in London to a French Huguenot family, he started his career in the booming railway industry, learning the hard way about earthworks, drainage, and large-scale project management. But the punishing work schedule led to a complete physical and nervous breakdown. He nearly died. For his recovery, his doctors ordered him to take a less stressful job. So, with classic Victorian understatement, he took the less stressful job of managing the decrepit, labyrinthine sewer system of the world's largest city. It was here that he truly found his calling. For years before the Great Stink, Civilized had been painstakingly surveying and mapping London's existing sewers, documenting their flaws, and quietly formulating a master plan. When the crisis hit, he wasn't scrambling for a solution. He was ready. He had already submitted several versions of his plan, only to have them rejected or endlessly debated over cost. Now, suddenly, the politicians were begging him to proceed. There's a wonderful, though likely apocryphal, story about him. It's said that during the worst days of the stink, while politicians were fainting, the historical perception of Bazalgette is almost universally positive, which is rare for any public figure. Regardless, in the summer of 1858, Joseph Bazalgette was the man of the hour. Bazalgette unrolls his master plan, and it's a thing of beauty in its audacity and scale. The system was ingeniously designed with 3 levels of interceptors on each side of the river, high level, mid-level, and low level, to account for London's varying topography. But here is where you see Bazal's true genius and what makes his system a sewer system on steroids. Of course, a plan this ambitious was not without its critics. The sheer scale of it was mind-boggling. Ultimately, his vision won out. His plan was approved. The plans are complete. The money is secured. And now the city transforms into a massive construction site. This isn't a neat, orderly process. It's chaos. Imagine you're walking through London now, not in 1858, but a few years later. In the early 1860s, the city is a maze of trenches, barricades, and mountains of excavated earth. The familiar clatter of carriages is now mixed with the rhythmic clang of pickaxes on stone, the shouts of foremen, and the groan of steam-powered cranes. Official records of worker injuries and deaths were not kept with modern rigor. See men working by the dim light of oil lamps, their figures silhouetted against the dark earth. It's a scene of organized chaos, a battle against the very ground beneath the city. For the first time, sluice gates across the city are opened, and then you hear it. A distant rumble that grows into a steady roar. Here, in a hall decorated with ornate ironwork that looks more like a palace than a utility building, giant steam engines hiss and turn. These engines, some named after members of the royal family, drive enormous pistons that lift the sewage from the low-level sewers up to the main outfall tunnel. Within a few years, fish began to return to the central Thames. Eels, flounder, and even smelt were being caught again in places that had been dead zones for a generation. The return of the fish was the ultimate proof that the river was healing. Historians continue to debate the speed and extent of this recovery. Some argue that while the Central Thames improved dramatically, the new system simply moved the problem further downstream to the outfall sites at Beckton and Crossness, creating new dead zones there. This is a valid criticism, and the issue of treating the sewage before its release wouldn't be fully addressed for another century. But for the people living in central London in the 1860s, the change felt nothing short of miraculous. The great stink was over. The monster had been tamed. But the project's greatest triumph was one that almost no one, not even Bazalgette himself, had fully anticipated. It's a symphony of industrial power, the brute force of steam tamed to serve the city's health. This stunning ironwork was not strictly necessary for function. Bazalgette deliberately made these places beautiful. A little-known fact is he considered these stations to be cathedrals of sewage, and believed the men who worked in these foul conditions deserved to be in an inspiring environment. It's the sound of millions of gallons of London's sewage, which for centuries had seeped into the ground or trickled into the Thames, now being collected and channeled for the first time. Return to the same spot on London Bridge where you first saw the horrors of the Thames. You lean over, and the change is breathtaking. The river is no longer a thick, brown soup. It's still murky. This is a busy urban river after all, but it's recognizably water. The thick, greasy film is gone. The constant bubbling of methane has ceased. The overwhelming, suffocating stench has vanished, replaced by the normal, slightly damp smell of a tidal river. For the first time in decades, London could breathe again. The papers were jubilant. The Times, which had so powerfully condemned the state of the river, now praised the new system as a triumph of modern science. It flows past you, a powerful, unified current beginning its long journey eastward. It's the first flush of success. The system is working. This was more than just a construction project. It was urban surgery on an unprecedented scale. London was being torn apart so it could be put back together again, cleaner and healthier, and slowly, brick by brick, tunnel by tunnel, the new system began to take shape, a hidden monument being built right under the feet of the unsuspecting populace. The debate continues about the true mortality rate among the navvies. Were they seen as disposable labor in a dangerous industry, or were the safety standards for the time actually quite high, as Bazalgette's supporters claimed? We know there were accidents, explosions from gas pockets, and deaths from collapses, but the exact numbers are lost to history. What is certain is that thousands of men toiled in dark, damp, and dangerous conditions to bring Bazel's vision to life. This is the period of digging through London's guts, and it was one of the most disruptive periods in the city's history. You see gangs of navvies, the tough, hard-drinking, nomadic laborers who built Britain's railways and canals swarming over the city. Its great trenches are being filled in, the barricades are coming down, and the city's streets are slowly returning to a semblance of normality. But the real action is happening underground and out of sight. The massive interceptor sewers are complete. The magnificent pumping stations with their gleaming steam engines are ready. The moment of truth has arrived. On a spring day in 1865, Prince Edward, the Prince of Wales, officiated the opening ceremony at the Crossness pumping station. It was a grand affair, a celebration of Victorian engineering and civic pride. But the real ceremony was the one you couldn't see. They are digging massive trenches, some up to 40 feet deep, right down the middle of major thoroughfares. Entire streets are closed for months, even years. The disruption to traffic and business was immense. Shopkeepers complained bitterly as their storefronts were blocked by piles of dirt. The noise and dust were relentless. To build the sewer that runs along the river, Bazalgette had to construct one of his other great achievements, the Victoria Embankment. To do this, his teams built a massive cofferdam out into the Thames, pumped it dry, and then built the new river wall and the low-level sewer behind it. In the process, they reclaimed 37 acres of land from the muddy foreshore, creating the beautiful Riverside Park and road we know today. The work was incredibly dangerous. Tunneling underneath a city as old and complex as London was a nightmare. The diggers constantly ran into unexpected obstacles. Ancient Roman walls, forgotten plague pits, the foundations of medieval buildings, and a treacherous web of existing gas and water pipes. Cave-ins were a constant threat. One of the strangest hazards they faced was the London clay itself. This thick, sticky soil was notorious for swelling and shifting, putting immense pressure on the newly built brick tunnels. A lesser-known technical innovation of the project was the quality of the brickwork. Bazalgette insisted on using the strongest Portland cement and specified a 4-course bricklaying technique, creating tunnels so robust they had barely needed any major repairs in over 150 years. The human cost of this massive project is something that historians still struggle to quantify precisely. You stand by the edge of one of these great trenches, looking down into the subterranean world being carved out below. Years of noise, dust, and disruption have passed. It's now the mid-1860s. Imagine you are deep underground in one of the new cathedral-like brick tunnels. It's dark, cool, and silent. You follow this new subterranean river to one of the great pumping stations. The real test, however, is back at the river. The immediate effect on the river's ecosystem was remarkable. The air is clean, the river is improving, and Londoners are celebrating their deliverance from the stink. But something else is happening, something quieter and far more profound. Investigators discovered that this area was one of the very few parts of London not yet connected to Bazalgette's new sewer system. The theory that had dominated medicine for 2,000 years was finally collapsing under the weight of evidence from bricks and mortar. Historians love to debate the interplay between intention and consequence in history. Did Bazalgette save London from cholera on purpose? The answer is no. The fear of a sudden, agonizing death from an unseen poison in the air was replaced by a new, hard-won sense of security. But Joseph Bazalgette wasn't a man to rest on his laurels. His great sewer network was just the beginning. The success of the project gave him immense political capital. He became a passionate advocate for the fire brigade and designed a system of dedicated, high-pressure water mains for firefighting, separate from the domestic water supply. This ensured that firefighters would always have enough water pressure to tackle blazes in tall buildings. It's a small detail, but one that saved countless properties and lives. He even designed the Woolwich Free Ferry, a steam-powered ferry service that was a vital transport link for East London S workers for over a century. Everything he touched, he built to last. He famously insisted on using the highest quality materials, often to the frustration of the politicians who had to approve his budgets. His obsession with Portland cement, for instance, helped to establish it as the gold standard for construction worldwide. His public trust, which he used to continue reshaping London for the next 30 years. And here lies a debate that continues among urban planners and engineers today. He was knighted by Queen Victoria for his services to the city. He died a celebrated public hero, a rare fate for a civil servant. His enduring legacy is not just in the bricks and mortar that lie beneath London's streets, but in the very concept of what a city could and should do for the health of its citizens. He established a new standard for urban infrastructure, proving that bold, large-scale engineering could solve seemingly insurmountable social problems. He didn't just build sewers, he built the foundation for the modern, livable metropolis. Was Bazalgette's system too successful? He created a single, centralized system that mixed rainwater with sewage. His combined sewer model became the standard for many cities around the world. However, in today's world, with much larger populations and more extreme weather events, these combined systems can be overwhelmed during heavy rain. This can lead to combined sewer overflows, where diluted raw sewage is discharged directly into the rivers to prevent the system from backing up into homes and streets. This is an issue that modern London is still grappling with, and they are currently building a new super sewer, the Thames Tideway Tunnel, K, to act as a new interceptor for Bazalgette's Victorian system. It's a testament to his original design that it has served the city for over 150 years. But it also shows how even the most brilliant solutions can create new challenges for future generations. As you walk through the city now, you are surrounded by his enduring, often hidden, legacy. His work is so fundamental to the city's structure that it's easy to overlook. To children who grew up in London in the 1870s and 80s would have no memory of the great cholera epidemics or the suffocating stink of the river. The city's relationship with disease had been fundamentally altered, not by a new medicine or a vaccine, but by a network of underground brick tunnels. The quiet engineer had not only cleaned the city's air, he had purified its water, and, in doing so, saved countless thousands of lives. He saved London from cholera by accident, as a side effect of trying to save it from a bad smell. This highlights a crucial point. Sometimes the right solution can be found for the wrong reasons. These weren't just decorative projects, they were complex engineering feats that housed interceptor sewers, protected the city from flooding, and created some of London's most iconic riverside roadways and parks. He also designed and built new bridges to cross the Thames, like the elegant Putney Bridge and the sturdy Hammersmith Bridge. He was instrumental in clearing away slums to make way for new, wide thoroughfares like Charing Cross Road and Shaftesbury Avenue, which transformed the West End and is still the heart of London's theatre district today. The fight against the bad air led to the engineering works that ultimately defeated the bad water. It's a powerful lesson in how progress can be messy and indirect. Bazalgette had set out to solve a smell problem, an engineering problem. He was a miasmatist himself and designed the sewers with the goal of removing the foul-smelling air. But in doing so, he had accidentally and brilliantly solved a microbiological problem he didn't fully understand. He had cut off the primary route for the cholera bacterium to spread through the population. A little-known fact is that Florence Nightingale, a staunch believer in the miasma theory for most of her career, was eventually convinced by the evidence of the 1866 outbreak and Bazal's success. Her conversion was a major turning point in the acceptance of germ theory among the medical community. More damningly, the water company was drawing its water from a reservoir that had been contaminated by a nearby leaking sewer. The cholera outbreak was confined almost perfectly to the homes served by this single tainted water source. Everywhere else in London, where people were drinking cleaner water from upstream sources, and their waste was being efficiently carried away. Cholera was virtually non-existent. The contrast was so stark, so undeniable, that it was impossible to ignore. The miasma theory, the belief that bad air caused disease, couldn't explain this geographical precision. The waterborne theory could. A disease that had terrorized the city for decades, arriving in terrifying, unpredictable waves, suddenly seems to vanish. Cholera. The last major cholera epidemic to hit London was in 1866. It was a serious outbreak. It was strangely contained. It primarily affected a specific area in East London. And this outbreak, paradoxically, would become the final, definitive proof that Dr. John Snow had been right all along. The 1866 outbreak occurred in an area whose water was supplied by the East London Water Company. You can almost feel the intellectual ground shifting for the medical and scientific establishment. This was the final nail in the coffin for the miasma theory. Its accidental triumph is one of the most fascinating aspects of the story. So, the disease that had haunted the city, that had filled its residents with a unique and terrible dread, simply faded away. The sewers are a success. The diseases are in retreat, and London is a cleaner, safer city. We've already seen the Victoria Embankment, but he also built the Albert Embankment on the south side of the river and the Chelsea Embankment further upstream. One of his lesser-known but equally vital contributions was his work on the problem of fire. The legacy of his sewers, however, remains his masterpiece. Bazalgette worked as the board's chief engineer until his retirement in 1889, 2 years before his death. The sewers are a success, the diseases are in retreat, and London is a cleaner, safer city. But Joseph Bazalgette wasn't a man to rest on his laurels. His great sewer network was just the beginning. The success of the project gave him immense political capital and public trust, which he used to continue reshaping London for the next 30 years. And here lies a debate that continues among urban planners and engineers today. Was Bazalgette's system too successful? He created a single, centralized system that mixed rainwater with sewage. The image of the river at twilight, with its glittering lights and dark flowing water, becomes hazy, indistinct. It's like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The weight of the 19th century, with its struggles and its stenches, lifts away, leaving you feeling light and peaceful. No sewers to build, no laws to pass. There is only this comfortable quiet, this gentle descent into rest. The story has served its purpose. It has carried you from a place of noise and chaos to a place of stillness and calm. The river flows on, silent and deep, through the sleeping city, and you flow with it into the soft, quiet depths of a well-deserved, peaceful sleep. The gentle lapping of the Thames against Bazaljit's embankment becomes a soft, rhythmic breathing. Slow inhale, a long, slow exhale. The quiet determination of the engineer, the frantic energy of the navvies, the collective sigh of relief from a city that could finally breathe again. All these energies have settled. They flowed down the river of time and out into the vast, quiet sea of the past. The sharp details of history, the names, the dates, taste the chemical compounds all begin to dissolve, leaving behind only a feeling of a long journey completed. This combined sewer model became the standard for many cities around the world. However, in today's world, with much larger populations and more extreme weather events, these combined systems can be overwhelmed during heavy rain. This can lead to combined sewer overflows, where diluted raw sewage is discharged directly into the rivers to prevent the system from backing up into homes and streets. This is an issue that modern London is still grappling with, and they are currently building a new super sewer, the Thames Tideway Tunnel, to act as a new interceptor for Bazaljit's Victorian system. It's a testament to its original design that it has served the city for over 150 years. But it also shows how even the most brilliant solutions can create new challenges for future generations. As you walk through the city now, you are surrounded by his enduring, often hidden legacy. He was knighted by Queen Victoria for his services to the city. He died a celebrated public hero, a rare fate for a civil servant. His enduring legacy is not just in the bricks and mortar that lie beneath London's streets, but in the very concept of what a city could and should do for the health of its citizens. He established a new standard for urban infrastructure, proving that bold, large-scale engineering could solve seemingly insurmountable social problems. He didn't just build sewers. He built the foundation for the modern, livable metropolis. His work is so fundamental to the city structure that it's easy to overlook. You've already seen the Victoria Embankment, but he also built the Albert Embankment on the south side of the river and the Chelsea Embankment further upstream. These weren't just decorative projects. They were complex engineering feats that housed interceptor sewers, protected the city from flooding. He became a passionate advocate of the fire brigade and designed a system of dedicated, high-pressure water mains for firefighting, separate from the domestic water supply. This ensured that firefighters would always have enough water pressure to tackle blazes in tall buildings. It's a small detail, but one that saved countless properties and lives. He even designed the Woolwich Free Ferry, a steam-powered ferry service that was a vital transport link for East London S workers for over a century. Everything he touched, he built to last. He famously insisted on using the highest quality materials, often to the frustration of the politicians who had to approve his budgets. His obsession with Portland cement, for instance, helped to establish it as the gold standard for construction worldwide, and created some of London's most iconic riverside roadways and parks. He also designed and built new bridges to cross the Thames, like the elegant Putney Bridge and the sturdy Hammersmith Bridge. He was instrumental in clearing away slums to make way for new, wide thoroughfares like Charing Cross Road and Shaftesbury Avenue, which transformed the West End and are still the heart of London's theatre district today. One of his lesser-known but equally vital contributions was his work on the problem of fire. The legacy of his sewers, however, remains his masterpiece. Bazanget worked as the board's chief engineer until his retirement in 1889, 2 years before his death, and now the story gently fades. The bustling sounds of modern London begin to soften, melting into the gentle hum in your room. You can feel yourself drifting now, untethered from the narrative. There are no more problems to solve tonight.